Before 1914, international communication was conducted via undersea cables laid along shipping lanes, most of which were under British control. Hours after the British ultimatum to Germany in August of 1914, they cut the German cables. German messages could be passed only by wireless, using ciphers to disguise their content. The signal Bulch der Kaiserliche Marine, or SKM, was captured from the German light cruiser SMS Megenberg after she ran aground in the Baltic Sea on the 26th of August 1914. The German-Australian steamer Hulbert was seized near Melbourne, Australia on the 11th of August, and the HVB codebook used by the German Navy to communicate with merchant ships and within the High Seas Fleet was captured. A copy of the book was sent to England by the fastest steamer, arriving at the end of October. During the Battle of Texel on the 17th of October, the commander of the German destroyer HMS S-119 threw overboard his secret papers in a lead chest as the ship sank. But on 30th November, a British trawler dragged up the chest. Room 40 gained a copy of the Verschurbbuch, or the B codebook, normally used by flag officers of the Kaiserliche Marine. The director of the Intelligence Division of the Admiralty, Rear Admiral Henry Oliver, established a code-breaking organization to decipher German signals, using cryptographers from academic backgrounds and making use of the windfalls taken from the German ships. At first, the inexperience of the cryptanalysis in naval matters led to errors in the understanding of the material. This lack of naval experience caused Oliver to make personal decisions about the information to be passed to other departments, many of which, particularly the operations department, had reservations about the value of Room 40. The transfer of an experienced naval officer, Commander W. Hope, remediated most of the deficiencies of the surveillance understanding. On the 14th of October, Oliver became chief of the Naval War Staff, but continued to treat Room 40 more as a freedom and a source for the informal group of officers around the First Ward of the Admiralty, Winston Churchill, which received decoded messages but had influence authority to use them to the best advantage. German ships had to report their position every night by wireless, and British listening posts along the East Coast took cross bearings to find the position of the ships when they transmitted. Their signals intelligence meant that the British did not need wasteful defensive standing patrols and swoops of the North Sea, but could economize on fuel and use the time for training and maintenance. The Admiralty also uncovered the German orders of battle and tracked the deployment of ships, which gave them an offensive advantage. Lack of a proper war staff at the Admiralty and poor liaison between Room 40, Henry Oliver, and the operations staff meant that the advantage was poorly exploited in 1915. It was not until 1917 that this was remedied. When German ships sailed, information from Room 40 needed to be passed on quickly to Oliver, but Oliver found it hard to delegate and would not routinely supply all disciples. Commanders at sea were supplied only with what the Admiralty thought they needed. Information could reach the Grand Fleet or late, incomplete, or mistakenly interpreted. When Jellicoe asked for a discipline section to take to sea, he was refused on security grounds. With the German High Seas Fleet confined to port after the British success at the Battle of Highland-Bright in 1914, Admiral Frederick von Entgel, the commander-in-chief of the High Seas Fleet, planned a raid on Scarborough, Hartlepool, and Whitby on the east coast of England with the 1st Scouting Group under the command of Admiral Franz von Hipper. a battlecruiser squadron of 3 battlecruisers and a large armored cruiser, supported by light cruisers and destroyers. Hipper opened fire at 0800 hours on the 16th of December, 1914, eventually killing 108 and wounding 525 civilians. British public and political opinion was outraged that German warships could sail so close to the British coast, shelling coastal towns with impunity. British naval forces had failed to prevent the attacks, and had also failed to intercept the raiding squadron. The British fleet had sailed by, but the German ships escaped in stormy seas and low visibility, assisted by British communication failures. The Germans had made the first successful attack on Britain since the 17th century and suffered no losses, but Ingle was unjustly blamed for missing an opportunity to inflict a defeat on the Royal Navy, despite creating the chance by his offensive mindedness. The British had let the raid occur, and appeared to the public to have been surprised, having been forewarned by decoded wireless messages, and then to have failed to sink the German raiding force on its way back to Germany. In 1921, the official historian Julian Corbett wrote, "Two of the most efficient and powerful British squadrons, knowing approximately what to expect, had failed to bring to action an enemy who was acting in close conformity with our appearance, and with whose advanced screen contact had been established." The British had escaped a political disaster because the British 1st Battlecruiser Squadron, under the command of Vice Admiral Sir David Beatty, was unsupported by the 2nd Battle Squadron, under the command of Vice Admiral Sir George Warrender, when it failed to make contact with the raiding force. The worst British failure was in the exploitation of the intelligence provided by the codebreakers at Room 40, under the command of Sir Alfred Edwin, that had given the British notice of the raid. Some interceptions decoded during the action had taken 2 hours to reach British commanders at sea, by when they were out of date or misleading. News of the sailing of the High Seas Fleet was delivered so late that the British commanders thought that the Germans were on the way when they were returning. At sea, Beatty had sent obvious signals, and that some commanders had not used their indentation. On the 30th of December, the commander of the home fleet, Sir Admiral John Jellicoe, gave orders that when in contact with German ships, officers were to treat orders from those ignorant of local conditions as instructions only, but he refused Admiralty suggestions to loosen ship formations for fear of deconcentrating contact command too far. Hipper suspected that the British had received advance warning about earlier operations of the High Seas Fleet from spy ships mingling with British and Dutch fishing boats operating near the German Bight and the Dogger Bank to observe German fleet movements. Hipper considered it that with the Dogger Bank midway on the short route to the English coast, a signal from each hauler could reach the British in time for the British battlecruisers to intercept a German sortie, certainly on the return voyage. Hipper ordered German ships vigorously to enforce search and seizure rules, fishing boats being brought into Cuxhaven to be searched. Buoyed by the success of the raid of the English coast, Admiral Hipper planned an attack on the British fishing fleet on the Dogger Bank. The German fleet had increased in size since the outbreak of the war, with the arrival in service of the Koenig-class dreadnought battleships, SMS Koenig, SMS Grosse Kurfürst, SMS Markgraf, and SMS Kronprinz, the 3rd Battle Squadron, and the Darthflinger-class battlecruiser Darthflinger. Hipper intended to clear the bank of British fishing vessels and obvious or dubious neutrals and to attack any small British warship in the area. With the High Seas Fleet covering the withdrawal of the battle cruisers, the limited nature of the operation confirmed to the ban by the Kaiser on operations by the High Seas Fleet that had been reiterated on the 11th of January. A slightly more aggressive strategy was permitted, within the policy of keeping the High Seas Fleet in being, in which the fleet would sortie to attempt to isolate and destroy advanced British forces or to attack the Grand Fleet if in greater strength. On the 19th of January, Betty had reconquered the area west of the German Bight and been seen by a German aircraft. The reconnaissance and British activity at the Dodger Bank led Ingle to order Hipper and the 1st Scouting Group to survey the area and surprise and destroy any light forces found there. The 1st Scouting Group contained the battlecruiser Seydlitz, the flagship, Moltke, Darthflinger, and the armored cruiser Blucher, 4 light cruisers, and 18 destroyers. Wireless transmissions from German ships in the Jade River on the 23rd of January 1915, intercepted and decoded by Room 40, ordered the British to a German sortie in force as far as the Dodger Bank. At the Admiralty, Wilson, Oliver, and Churchill arranged a plan to confront the Germans with a superior opponent. A rendezvous was set for the 24th of January at 0700 hours, 30 nautical miles north of the Dodger Bank, and about 180 nautical miles west of the Helgoland Light. The battlecruisers comprised the 1st Battlecruiser Squadron under the command of Admiral David Beatty, with the battlecruiser Lion as Beatty's flagship, as well as the battlecruiser Tiger and the battlecruiser Princess Royal. The newer 2nd Battlecruiser Squadron, under the command of Rear Admiral Gordon Moore, deputy to Beatty, had the battlecruiser New Zealand as his flagship, and the battlecruiser Indomitable. The Hartwich Force, under the command of Commodore Ringel Trywhitt, sailed from Hartwich with 3 light cruisers and 35 destroyers to rendezvous with the battlecruisers at 0700 hours on the 24th of January. To cover the East Coast and act as a distant support, the 3rd Cruiser Squadron and the 7 pre-dreadnoughts of the 3rd Battle Squadron, under the command of Edward Eden Bradford, sailed from Rosyth for an area in the North Sea from which they would cut off the German force if it moved north. The Grand Fleet left Scapa at 2100 hours on the 23rd of January to swoop the southern North Sea, but could not be expected to arrive on the scene until the afternoon of the 24th of January. Soon after the German force sailed, the 1st Light Cruiser Squadron, under the command of Commodore William Goodenough, and the battlecruisers departed Rosyth, heading south. At 07:05 on the 24th of January, a clear day with good visibility, they encountered the German screening vessels at the Dodger Bank. Sighting the smoke from a large approaching force, Hipper headed southeast at 07:35 to escape, but the battlecruisers were faster than the German squadron, which was held back by the slower armored cruiser Blucher and the coal-fueled torpedo boats. By 0800 hours, the German battlecruisers had been sighted from Lion, but the older battlecruisers of the British 2nd Battlecruiser Squadron were lagging behind the 1st Battlecruiser Squadron, chasing the Germans from a position astern and to starboard. The British ships gradually caught up, some reaching a speed of 27 knots and close to gun range. Betty chose to approach it from this direction so that the prevailing wind blew the British ships' smoke clear, allowing them a good view of the German ships, while German gunners were partially blinded by their funnel and gun smoke blowing towards the British ships. Lion opened fire at 08:52 at a range of 20,000 yards, and the other British ships commenced firing as they came within range, while the Germans were unable to reply until 09:11 because of the shorter range of their guns. No warships had engaged at such long ranges or at such high speeds before, and accurate gunnery for both sides was an unprecedented challenge. But after a few salvos, British shells straddled the Blucher. The British fire was concentrated on the battlecruiser Seydlitz at the head of the line and the Blucher at the rear. With 5 British ships against 4 German, Beatty intended that his 2 rear ships, New Zealand and Indomitable, should engage Blucher, while his leading 3 engaged their opposing numbers. Captain Henry Peely of the newer battlecruiser Tiger assumed that the 2 ships would concentrate on the leading German ship and engage Seydlitz, leaving Moltke free to fire at Lion. Tiger's fire was ineffective, as she mistook the shell splashes from Lion for her own, when the fall of shot was some 3,000 yards beyond Seydlitz. At 09:43, Seydlitz was hit by a 13.5-inch or 340mm shell from Lion, which penetrated her after-turret barbette and caused an ammunition fire in the working chamber. This fire spread rapidly throughout other compartments, igniting ready propellant charges all the way to the magazine, and knocked out both rear turrets, with the loss of 165 men. Only the prompt action of the executive officer, Wilhelm Hemtkamp, in flooding the magazines saved Seydlitz from a magazine explosion that would have destroyed the ship. The British ships were relatively unscathed until 10:18, when Darthflinger hit Lion with several 30.5cm or 12-inch shells, damaging her engines and causing flooding. Lion lost speed and began to fall behind. At 10:41, Lion narrowly escaped a disaster similar to that on Seydlitz, when a German shell hit the forward turret and ignited a small ammunition fire, but it was extinguished before causing a magazine explosion. A few minutes later, taking on water and listing to port, Lion had to stop her port engine and reduce speed to 15 knots, and was soon out of action, having been hit 14 times. At 10:30, Blucher had been hit by a shell from Princess Royal, which caused the ammunition fire and boiler room damage. Blucher had to reduce speed to 17 knots and lagged behind the rest of the German force. Beatty ordered Indomitable, his sole ship, to intercept Blucher. With his ships running short of ammunition, Hipper chose to steam for home, leaving the disabled Blucher behind to save his remaining ships. The annihilation of the German squadron appeared likely to the British until 10:54, when Beatty believed he saw a submarine's periscope on Lion's starboard bow, ordering a 90-degree turn to port to avoid a submarine ambush. The periscope may have been a surfacing run-out torpedo, which had been launched 15 minutes earlier by the German destroyer V5. At 11:02, realizing that so sharp a turn would cause the range to open too much, Beatty ordered course NE to limit the turn to 45 degrees, and then added engage the enemy's rear, to clarify his intent that the other ships, which had now left Lion far behind, should pursue the main German force. With Lion's electrical generators out of action, Beatty could only signal using flag hoists, and both signals were flown at the same time. The combination of the signal course NE, which happened to be the direction of Blucher, and the signal to engage the rear, was misunderstood by Beatty's second-in-command, Rear Admiral Moore, on the New Zealand, as an order for all battlecruisers to finish off Blucher. The British battlecruisers broke off the pursuit of the German squadron and attacked Blucher, with most of the British light cruisers and destroyers joining in. Beatty tried to correct his obvious misunderstanding by using the order for Nelson at the Battle of Trafalgar. Engage the enemy more closely, but this order was not in the signal book, and Beatty chose keep nearer to the enemy as the closest equivalent. By the time the signal was hoisted, more ships were too far away to read Beatty's flags, and the correction was not received. Despite the overwhelming odds, Beluga put the British destroyer HMS Meteor out of action and scored 2 hits on the British battlecruisers with her 21-centimeter or 8.3-inch guns. Beluga was hit by around 70 shells and wrecked. When struck by 2 torpedoes from the light cruiser Arthurus, Beluga finally capsized at 24 degrees north, latitude 525 east, long, and sank at 1313, with the loss of 792 of her crew. British ships began to rescue survivors, but they were hindered by the arrival of the Zeppelin L5 or LZ-28 and a German seaplane, which attacked it with small bombs. No damage was done by the British ships, but on speed and withdrew to avoid further aerial attack, leaving some of the survivors behind. By this time, the rest of the German ships were too far away for the British to catch up. Lion would make 10 knots at the beginning of the 300 nautical mile return voyage, escorted by Indomitable. Beatty contemplated leaving a flotilla of destroyers to guard Lion and sending the rest to the German Bight to make a night attack on the German ships, but the damage to Lion caused more problems. As she crept home, the ship suffered further engine trouble from saltwater contamination in the boiler feed water system, and her speed dropped to 8 knots. Lion was taken in tow by Indomitable, an operation which took 2 hours, in which the battlecruisers were exceedingly vulnerable to submarine attacks. At 1700 hours, the voyage resumed. The ships eventually managed 10 knots, and when the Grand Fleet arrived, Jellicoe increased the screen to 13 light cruisers and 67 destroyers. A message from the Admiralty arrived that the Germans were planning a night destroyer attack, but that the destroyers with the 2 scouting groups were low on fuel, and those with the High Seas Fleet were too far away. Lion and Indomitable slowed to 7 knots overnight when Lion had more engine trouble, and at dawn they were still 100 nautical miles short of the Firth of Forth. The destroyers reformed into an anti-submarine screen, and the ships received the Firth at midnight. The destroyer Meteor was towed into the Humber estuary. Lion was out of action for 4 months. Fisher having decreed that the damage being repaired at Armstrong's on the Keene without her going into dry dock, making for an extremely difficult and time-consuming job. The surviving German ships reached port. Northwinger was repaired by the 17th of February, but Cetus needed a dry dock and was not ready for sea until the 1st of April. At first, the Germans thought the Tiger had been sunk, because of a large fire that had been set on her decks, but it was soon clear that the battle was a serious German reverse. Kaiser Wilhelm II to issue an order that all risks to surface vessels were to be avoided. Enkel was sacked and replaced by Admiral Hugo von Pohl. The damage to Cetus revealed flaws in the protection of her magazines and dangerous ammunition handling procedures. Some of these failings were remedied in the High Seas Fleet before the Battle of Jutland on the 31st of May through the 1st of June 1916. The Germans thought the appearance of the British squadron at dawn was too remarkable to be a coincidence and concluded that a spy near their base in Jade Bay was responsible, not that the British were reading their encrypted wireless communications. In 1920, Scheer wrote that the number of British ships present suggested that they had known about the operation in advance, but that this was put down to circumstances, although other reasons could not be executed. Beatty had lost control of the battle, and he judged that the opportunity of an overwhelming victory had been lost. The Admiralty ingenuously believed that the Darthflinger had been badly damaged, later reached the same conclusion. Jutland showed that the British battlecruisers were still vulnerable to ammunition fires and magazine explosions if hit by plunging fire. Had Moore's 3 fast battlecruisers pursued Hipper's remaining 3, leaving the slowest Indomitable behind as Betty intended, the British might have been at a disadvantage and had been defeated. Blucher demonstrated the ability of the German ships to absorb great punishment. All of Hipper's remaining ships were larger, faster, newer, more heavily armed, and far better armored than Blucher. Only Seydlitz had suffered serious damage, apart from the sinking of Blucher. The Germans out-hit the British by over 3-1, with 22 heavy caliber hits, 16 on Lion and 6 on Tiger, against 7 British hits. The battle, although inconclusive, boosted British morale. Rear Admiral Moore was quietly replaced and sent to the Canary Islands, and Captain Henry Peely of Tiger was blamed for not taking over when Lion was damaged. Ralph Seymour remained Beatty's flag lieutenant, although he was responsible for hoisting Beatty's 2 commands on one flag hoist, allowing them to be read as one. The use of wireless allowed consciential control of the ships from the Admiralty, which cramped the incentive of the men on the spot. Signals between the ships continued to be by flag, but there was no revision of the signal book or the assumption of its authors. Signals aboard Lion was again poor in the first hours of Jutland, with serious consequences for the British. The battlecruisers failed to improve fire distribution, and similar targeting errors were made at Jutland. In 1929, Julian Corbett, the official naval historian, recorded 792 men killed and 45 wounded out of the 1,026 crew of Blucher, 189 of the men being rescued by the British. Seydlitz lost 159 men killed and 33 wounded, and Kohlberg lost 3 men killed and 2 wounded. In 1965, Martyr wrote that over 1,000 German sailors had been killed or captured, for British casualties of fewer than 50 men killed or wounded. In 2003, Massey wrote that the German casualties were an estimated 951 men killed and 78 wounded, most in Blucher. 153 men were killed out of 33 were wounded in the fire in the 2 after turrets of Seydlitz. The British rescued 189 unwounded prisoners and 45 wounded from Blucher. British casualties were 15 killed and 80 men wounded. On Lion, 2 men had been killed and 11 wounded, most by a shell hit in the 8 turret lobby. 10 men were killed on Tiger, with 9 men wounded, and on Meteor, 4 men were killed and 2 were wounded. The Battle of the Dogger Bank was a devastating loss to the Germans, and an even bigger devastation to the morale of the sailors aboard the Seydlitz, Deathflinger, Moltke, and the remaining survivors of the Gluka, either captured aboard the British warships or left stranded in the waters of the Dodger Bank. Even though it was a devastating loss, it proved to bring things to light on both sides of the spectrum. It revealed that there were weaknesses within the High Seas fleet in regards to their ships, and some of the practices that the sailors had been performing was risking the ships to ultimate destruction, if not fixed. It showed that the British battlecruisers could not just be heavily damaged, but sunk if given the correct opportunities or properties during battle. This battle also further proved that the use of intercepting and decrypting German wireless signals would prove to be a great tool if the British could find a way to use it effectively. A great question to puzzle over is why the Germans never thought that the wireless itself was to blame for the such sudden surprise attack. Leave a comment down below if you could give a thought to this. If you would be interested to hear a great conversation in regards to the Battle of the Dodger Bank, I would highly recommend the video from World of Warship's official channel on this topic, which is linked below. In it, you'll find a detailed conversation between not only the members of the World of Warship's official channel itself, but also special guests featuring Dratchville and Dr. Alexander Clark. They break down the battle and its before and after events in great detail. It's a video that I use for a lot of the research in this video, and I would highly recommend it to anybody, especially with how they put it into detail. If you enjoyed today's video, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Also ring in the notification bell so you don't miss out on any future content. If you guys have any thoughts, questions, or even suggestions, please leave those down in the comments below. I always read you guys' comments, and I try my best to implement or get done whatever is being commented. Anyway, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and we'll see you in the next video. Peace out.